No, 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 no. That is not what this book is about. Have you ever been in that situation? Let's discuss. Welcome or welcome back to Mr. Francy Reads. Let's go. Yes, hello, and welcome or welcome back to Mr. Francy Reads. I am Mr. Francy, and I am thrilled that you have once again chosen to join me as today I discuss my first informative video. It is absolutely time to do some more informative vids. And today's topic being why I go into books blind. I'm going to open up by discussing what going into books blind means. I'm also going to talk about how I used to not go into books blind. I'm then going to discuss why I go into books blind. So, this is just, as I say, going to be a fun, discussional type video, so we might as well just jump right on in. So the first thing I want to do is just give a very quick overview description of what I mean by the word blind when I say going into books blind. So, as you may well know, I'm going to show you a book that I loved, so I love this book. This is Bits and Pieces by Whoopi Goldberg. It's her memoir. I gave this 5 stars. It was fantastic. And importantly, it's a hardcover, and so therefore, on this side of the dust jacket, you have the premise. If it were a paperback, it'd be on the back. What I mean by going into a book blind is I don't read this before I begin reading my books. I don't want to know the premise, or you may call it the blurb. I don't want to know I don't want to know anything about that book before I start my reading journey with it. Well, actually, that's not true. Let me very quickly explain. I do want to know statistics. I do want to know the title of the book. I do want to know the author. I do want to know the age rating, and I do want to know the genre. The reason I want to know this is because it helps me to set up expectations. The title, not necessarily, it's just unavoidable. If you're picking up a book, it's hard not to see the title, it's hard not to see the author, so it just comes with the package. You can't really avoid this unless you're going into a bookstore, grabbing the book like this and going, "Hi there, I want to buy this, please don't show me the title." Okay, I'm not going to look at the title at all, and I'm going to go to page one, like, clearly, I'm going to see the title or author. But the reason I want to know the age rating and the genre is because of my own expectations going in. Am I reading a middle grade, a book that is targeted to an audience that is younger than teenage age? Am I going into a YA, a book that is targeted for teenagers? Or am I going into an adult book, a book that is targeted to adults? Regardless of genre, each age range level will come with my own expectations for it. For example, if I'm going into a middle grade book, there are certain things I definitely do not expect a middle grade book to contain. However, if I'm going into an adult book, then yeah, I absolutely am going to go in there knowing that I need to expect the unexpected because it's an adult book and anything goes, right? And then, of course, you have the genre as well. If I'm going into an adult book that just so happens to be a cozy mystery, I will have expectations of the limitations that will come with that cozy. For example, if a murder is going to take place, I'm expecting to not see the murder play out. On the other hand, if I'm picking up an adult horror, of course I am expecting to see a murder be carried out or some sort of torture or whatever it is, because it's a horror, and not only is it a horror, but it's an adult horror, so that line can be crossed. But aside from that, I want to know nothing. So, How did I get to this point? How did Mr. Francy, who started his booktube reading journey in January of 2020, get to the point suddenly where he went, yeah, no, premises and blurbs, they're just not for me? Well, I'm so very glad that you asked this question, because there are many and varying reasons. First of all, I do need to let you know that this was not always how I was. When I first started my booktube journey, I absolutely did read premises, and those premises helped me to determine the types of books that I was actually going to place onto my TBR. Because it does, of course, make sense that if I read a premise of a book that doesn't interest me, why am I wasting my time putting it on my TBR? And I'm not the type of person, and I say this judgment-free, I'm not the type of person to jump on a hype train purely because there is a hype train. In fact, if anything, it turns me off more than anything. So I may pick up a hyped up book that has been around for years and years and years, and now the train has well and truly left the station and isn't coming back. That, of course, I'm not here to say you should be doing what I do. You may watch this video and determine at the end of this video that it is something that you would like to do, but I'm not here to say you need to do things the way I do them. I am purely here explaining why I do what I do. So yeah, I hope that that does come across. I got to a stage where the premises really did start to let me down. So I'm going to give you some examples by putting 3 different books up onto the screen. The first book I'm going to put up on the screen is this book, Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. So this was a very much hyped up book when it was released, and I had heard a really good premise about this book that I'm going to give you that will be as spoiler-free as a premise should be. So basically, the premise of this book is that we are following all these different characters who are trying to pull off the impossible heist. If I tell you anything else, it is going to be way too much of a spoiler. Now, this sounded like a great idea to me. It was a fantasy book, and they're trying to pull off a heist. I love fantasies. I love exploring magic systems, found families, amazing character arcs, trying to achieve the impossible, all those sorts of things. It really sounded like it was right up my alley. I got 3/4 of the way through this book, and that thing that the premise states is what the book is about still had not happened. And I don't know about you. I mean, you may, say, Mr. Francy, that's fine, as long as it was there somewhere, but that's just not me. If your premise of your book is telling me something that's gonna happen, and I get to the 3/4 mark and it still hasn't happened, I'm wondering how it is your premise. The next book I'm going to show you did something a little different with its premise, and that is The Little French Bridal Shop by Jennifer Dupuy. Now, I need to be completely honest with you, I DNF'd this book, and a big part of the reason is because of the premise. I found it to be complete false advertising. The premise on the book that I had read something along the lines of, we follow this woman who has gone back to her small town home for reasons that really don't matter. She walks by a wedding dress shop, sees a wedding dress in the window, and decides to just try it on for a laugh because she's had a very tough life to this point, just wanted to do something fun for herself. Well, now, unbeknownst to her, everyone else is planning her wedding, and there's no wedding that's happening, so what's she gonna do? It sounded really humorous, and I couldn't help but picture Gilmore Girls. I don't know why, but I just had Gilmore Girls in my head. And for example, let's say Lorelai went in and tried on the wedding dress, and if you've seen the show, it's like Miss Patty and Babette, where Luke's going, oh, she's getting married, and then they plan this wedding that's never happening, and I just thought it was going to be so amazing. No. Big spoiler alert coming up here. She goes into the wedding dress shop to try on the wedding dress, and then the bridal shop owner, completely understandable, says to her, oh, when's the big day? And this main character lies through her teeth, makes up a day, and says, oh, I'm getting married on this day. And then decides to, not only that, go home to her mother's house or grandmother or wherever she's staying, call the local florist who she knew growing up, saying, guess what? I'm getting married on this day when she's not. And it was just a very completely misleading premise. Had I known that the book was about a woman who sees a wedding dress in the window of a bridal shop, and then she perpetuates a lie that she's going to get married, at least the premise would have been truthful. I get that the bottom line at the end of the day to sell books is to, make the sale and make the money. I get that. It's a business at the end of the day, and I do understand that. But if a publishing company writes too many misleading premises, readers are no longer going to trust them. So I don't think it's a good idea, all in all, to write misleading premises. The third example I'm going to give you is this book, Cancer Schmancer by Fran Drescher. This is an adult memoir, and I think I still ended up giving it 4 stars, despite the fact that the premise couldn't have been any more wrong. I just got up to get this book because I wanted to read it word for word, the premise, because this was the book I thought I had, and I don't. I must have unhauled it, and I'm totally fine with that. Look, first and foremost, I just want to say I have no issues with any of the authors of these works, and Fran Drescher is definitely a great example of that. I love her as an actress, and I really appreciated reading the memoir. However, the premise of this book says something along the lines of, this book is not about cancer, this book is about schmancer. Poking fun and being lighthearted about topics to do with cancer. Now, honestly, that sounded amazing to me. Fran Drescher has a wonderful sense of humor, so I thought that this was going to be a really fun read. And again, the premise literally says, this is not about cancer, it's about schmancer. Poking fun at the hilarity that is cancer. It was a very serious book. And so, it makes sense that a book discussing cancer would be serious, don't get me wrong, but when the premise goes out of its way to say this is fun, this is humorous, and it's not, then again, it is absolutely blatant false advertising. Now, I don't know if Fran Drescher came up with the premise or if the publishing company did or what happened there, but yeah, again, it was a misleading premise. Premises don't include pertinent information that I want to know. Now, again, I've said this many times before, and I'll say it as many times as I am able. One of the things I really appreciate about bibliophiles, readers who love reading, bibliophiles, is that we are not a monolith. Everyone is different. No two people are exactly alike when it comes to reading, the way they read, their thoughts and feelings on reading in general, and their thoughts and feelings on even specific books. Everyone is different. But for me, there are certain things that I would love to know before I pick up a book, and the books themselves don't contain these things. One example being, I myself personally am not a fan of purple prose. I'm just not. It's not my thing. I'm not a fan of fancy schmancy writing. I'm just not. It's just not my thing. But nowhere in a book does it say, before you get to the actual story, warning, this is a purple prose-filled book. Warning, this is a fancy schmancy writing book. Warning, this is a book that Shakespeare himself may have written because thee, thy, thou, thou make several appearances. Nope, it does not appear there. I'm also someone who's not a fan of the slow burn. I appreciate great character arcs. I appreciate that books need to give us some sort of information before we do move forward. I much prefer the show rather than the tell when it comes to exposition. But none of this is included in a book. At the beginning of a book, like before the story starts, saying, just so you know, this is a tell rather than a show. Just so you know, this is a slow burn. They don't say it. Now, I understand you're probably yelling at me and saying, but Mr. Francy, you can see that in reviews, whether you watch a video or go to Goodreads or whatever and read a written review. It will say this was a slow burn. Yeah, absolutely. You're 1000% correct. But what the review will also do is spoil any part of a premise, and I don't want to read a premise, so I can't do that. That's not an option for me. And so, therefore, because of all these things, together as a one whole, I prefer to go into books blind. And that way I know I'm not going to be let down because I haven't read any sort of a premise, and I'm just going to go in see what happens, and make of whatever that is what I do. I will say, in the spirit of true transparency, which I always have on this channel, yes, there are absolutely times when I will read a premise, but the exception to my standard rule of not reading premises is I will read a premise well in advance of reading a book, to make sure that it does sound like something that I may like, knowing that I will forget what that premise is by the time I've picked it up, and all I will remember is what I read of the premise, it sounded interesting to me. Oh, what I read at the time when I read the premise, it sounded like it would be the right book for me. I don't remember what that was, so we'll see. I'll be surprised when I read it. And then there is no expectations other than, I remember what I read sounded like something that would work for me. Does that make sense? So yeah, I definitely will do that. And yeah, I have a video coming up soon where I'm talking about why I plan my TBRs a year in advance. And this comes under that situation. If I'm planning out books that I'm reading, say in late 2024, which I did, if I'm planning on writing out a TBR from January all the way through to December of 2025, then yeah, absolutely, I will look at premises of books that I plan to read in June, July, August, September, October, and so on, because by the time I get to them, I'm totally gonna forget what that premise is. That does work for me, but the actual premise, reading it just before I read a book, be that the month before, a week before, a day before, that doesn't work for me. And maybe it's because my expectations are too high, but 9 times out of 10, my reason would be because of the fact that the premise itself is misleading. Now, sometimes it could be the way I interpret a premise. Maybe a premise is written in a way that has multiple interpretations and ways that it can be interpreted, and I just took it the wrong way. And hey, if that's the case, absolutely, I own that, and that's my fault. But if the premise is going to say it is fun and humorous, then why is the book not fun and humorous? Six of Crows. Why are we saying a premise for something that doesn't happen until 3/4 of the way through the book? I still don't get that. I still don't get why the premise is we follow these misfit band of characters who are trying to pull off the impossible heist, and the heist thing doesn't happen until 3/4 of the way through the book. I mean, clearly you could have come up with something else, and there are many things that they could have come up with, because the story prior to it getting to the impossible heist is still interesting. But you comment below and let me know what you think. Do you go into books blind? Do you go into books partially blind? Do you read premises well in advance like me so that you forget them by the time you go into the book? What do you do? Let me know in the comments section below. But in the meantime, that is where I am going to leave it for this particular informative video. And until next time, please do be kind, love one another, and spread your sparkling energy all throughout the world. I post videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'll see you again soon. Mwah! And of course, happy reading! Bye everyone!